what we're going to be going over here is the learning curve, or what they may refer to as an experience curve. And what we're going to be doing here, we're just going to be setting this learning curve function up here on an Excel spreadsheet. So when we're talking about learning curves, this is the case here where you start out with a new product or that you're going to be manufacturing, and you're going to have a certain cost on that product. You don't have a lot of experience building the product, so you're going to have a certain cost that you start out with. But as you gain experience and you build more and more of the product, then your costs are going to go down. And this is where we're going to be using the learning curve calculator here to calculate that cost function here. Okay, so when we're talking about our Excel spreadsheet here for this setting up this learning curve, first we'll just go over the basics here and what we're doing with our Excel spreadsheet, and then we'll get into the details where we put in the actual functions here to determine the different our learning curve. So when we have a learning curve, we start out with two things here. We're going to have an improvement rate and a learning rate. And just for this example, I'm going to say our improvement rate is 20%, our learning rate is going to be 80% here. So what do we mean by that here? So again, with this learning curve, an 80% learning curve means that the individual unit time cost here is going to decrease by 20% here each time the output here doubles. And then you're going to have a new individual cost, and it's going to be 80% of the previous one here. But what we're going to be doing here in this case, we're going to be looking specifically at the incremental unit time or unit cost model here, the Crawford model. There's the cumulative average model, and then we've got the incremental unit time model here, not to confuse them. But we're going to be specifically looking at this incremental unit time model because it's a bit different than the cumulative average model. Okay, so the first thing we start with is this improvement rate here. We're going to look at 20% or 80%. So we're going to have to supply the improvement rate here. And just for, just to understand here, this improvement rate, say if it was, we set 10% here, then we'd have a 90% learning rate here. And if our improvement rate, we set it at 15% here, then our learning rate would be at 85%. So these have to add up to 100% here. Okay, so let's go over, just briefly go over our learning curve Excel calculator here, and then we'll get into the details here on setting up our different functions here. So first off, we're going to have 4 different columns here, and then we're going to have a number of rows here. So for column A, that's going to be our unit number or the quantity or produced or pieces here. And we're going to, this learning curve here, I've got set up quantities 1 through 20. So what do we mean by these unit numbers here, quantities? They're just some reference quantities that you're looking at. So if you're building, say, airplanes or something, you may be just looking at single units here, 1 through 3, 4, 5, 6, and so forth. But if you have a high volume product, these unit numbers here may represent different lots or different size lot, different quantities in lots and in thousands and so forth. But nonetheless, this is a gauge here. This is where, as you move down here on the chart here, from 1 on down here, it's going to look, your unit cost is going to go down. So you're going to have some quantities over here, and then that's in column A here. And then for column B, this is where you're going to calculate your unit cost, and there's going to be some function that we have to define here. And for the incremental unit, they refer to as an individual unit cost here, or some hours per piece or some quantity here. So the next thing we have to do for our unit cost here, we have to supply the cost of the first unit here. And I'm just putting it down as 100 here, and it really represents like 100% here. And the reason I'm using 100 here is that it's easy to see how your function here, how your unit cost decreases here as you gain experience here. So nonetheless, it's going to be some reference here, and if you have to determine the total or the cost that you're looking at, you're going to have some dollar amounts on a per unit basis, and you take it times this unit cost. This is the function that we're going to be calculating here. And then for column C, this is going to be so anyway, for B here, it's going to be some special function that we're going to have to calculate here. And that's going to be same for incremental unit time and the cumulative average time. Just to make a point of it, they both use this same costing function here. But it's a matter of how they calculate their cumulative total cost and cumulative average cost and so forth here. So next here for column C, this is you're going to be your cumulative total cost, and that's going to really be the sum here of column B. So if we look at, stayed out with row 5 here, we start out we start out with 100, or our first unit, cost of the first unit, we're just setting at 100%. So the cost of the next unit here would be 80 here from B, so we just add that to our 100, we come up with 180, and then for the next cost here, we take 180, add the 70.2 to it, and come up with 250.2 here, and so forth. So this cumulative total cost here is just the sum of your unit cost here in column B. So that's what you have to note here for this incremental unit time function here that we're looking at, our model here. And then our cumulative average time is just taking whatever cost you have, your cumulative total cost, whatever row you're looking at, and you divide it by the unit number or the quantity that you have here. So for row 8 here, we'd have a cumulative total cost would be 314. Divided by 4 units here in row 8, and you're going to come up with a cumulative average cost here of 78.55 here. So it's just taking your cumulative total cost here, in this case, whatever row you're working with, and divide it by the unit or number of quantity or pieces here. Okay, and so that's our 4 different columns here. Okay, so when we're talking about our costing function here, just to understand what goes on here. So when our output doubles here, I've got it marked in red. We're sitting here at 2 units, then it doubles when we're down to building 4 units here, and then from 4 units it would double at 8 units here. So what we're talking about is this costing function here, those unit values here for our costing function. Our costing function here, this f of x here, is going to decrease by 20% each time our units double. So from 2 units here to 4 units, it was sitting at 80, individual cost here at 80, and then when we get down, double it to 4 units, it goes down to 64. That's decreases 20%. And then if we go down here to 8, from our 64 to from 4 units to 8 units here, doubles again. We have again a decrease here of 20% from 64 down to 51.2 here. Okay, but the key is here looking at our columns C and D here. So when we're dealing with this incremental unit cost here, this column C here, this total cumulative cost here, that's going to increases at a variable rate here. So when we're working with the cumulative average model, if you're familiar with it, would have gone down here at a constant rate, but the difference is here with this incremental unit, it increases at a variable rate here. Okay, so let's just go down here, maybe explain it here. So our cumulative total cost here, shown, increases by a variable rate. I'm just showing it here so you understand that. So that's really the key here when you're working with this incremental unit time here. Okay, right, so we're back up here. So then cumulative average cost again was just the difference between whatever you have your cumulative total cost here divided by the unit that your number of pieces you're looking at here for the particular unit number here divided by total cumulative cost for that particular unit that you're looking at. That gives you your cumulative average cost here. Okay, so now let's go and let's look at our actual calculations here. Okay, so again, what you're going to do here, we got these 4 columns. We just went through and we just reviewed them. Again, so we're going to have to supply the improvement rate here. I'm just showing it at 20%, but you'd have to put that in here, either at 10, 50, whatever. You can put any percentage you want in here. So again, if we had 10% in here, then we'd have a learning rate of 90%. But nonetheless, for setting up our learning curve calculator, you can put this in at some percentage. I didn't look at it, but just put it in at 20% here for Excel here. Just enter it at 20%, and that's in B2, column B, row 2 here. We'd put it in for the exact, just to put 20% or 10% or 15%, and then your learning rate, it's automatically calculated. You have to set up here for column B3 here. You'd have to put an equal sign, and then you have 1 minus B2, whatever goes into B2 here. So in this case, 1 minus the 20% that we have here is going to give us a learning rate of 80%. Okay, so that's taking care of setting up your you have to establish your improvement rate and then put your into your column B3 here equals 1 minus B2 here, reference that. And then the other thing you have to put in here is that unit cost here. In column B here, the first row, that's for the first piece, that's the cost of the first piece. And I like to use 100 here because it's a good reference here when you start dealing with your different numbers here and so you would just take to determine some cost here, whatever your costing function here that you have here, then you just take some dollars, time it. But nonetheless, you got to supply that here. Okay, so we've taken care of those 3 entries here. Here you don't have to put in any quantity, or just put in whatever your unit cost is in those terms. But now let's go down here and let's look at, we'll just concentrate here on row 8 here, or a unit quantity number here of 4 here, and how we'd make our entries here for columns B, C, and D here. And I've got them numbered here. I've got these functions here, 1, 2, and 3 here. 1 goes to column B, 2 goes to column C, and 3 here goes to column D here. Okay, so first here for column B here, this is the entry you're going to have to make here, and this is that function here. So you use equal sign B $5 here. So this is an absolute reference here in Excel. So it's always going to come back to this unit cost here. You're always taking that. It's always going to be, your function's always going to come back to this unit cost because of that $. Then this asterisk here, that's just a multiplying sign, and that multiplying sign here times B time $sign here 3, and that's your reference here, your learning rate reference here. It's always going to be using whatever learning rate you have here, that 1 minus our B2 here, or that 80% in this case. So that you have to put in here. And then just remember your brackets and everything. You have to get those accurate. And then you have this caret here. Now you raise this B $3. You raise it to the power here of ln A8 or ln, and this is ln, and this what you're raising it to that power here. It's really the unit number you're working with, or that unit quantity for that particular line here. So for the case here, we're working with a unit number of 4 here for line 8. We would actually be entering 4 in here. You have to put in your reference here as A8. So A8 would be 4 here. That's what would be going in here. But you have to put in the A8 here. So the idea is this here. So you would have for 2 here, you'd have to put in A6. 3 here, A7, A8. So nonetheless, you just copy that function down here. For each of these different rows, you would have to have the corresponding A column number in here. And then that's that first natural log that you raised here to the B to the $3 here. Then what's sitting up in that exponent is that natural log here of that those unit number that you're working with. You divide it by the natural log of 2 here. It's always the natural log of 2 here. Okay, so that's what you'd have to put in. Just understand what's going on here. So maybe let's go down and let's just look at this natural log of 2 and A8 here. So, okay. So when we're talking about that ln here, that's the natural log here. X, that's that's whatever unit number or the quantity that you have here. You'd have to have your A8s, or what A8s, A6s, and so forth. That represents the unit number here. And then ln base 2 here. So really when you raise that power, it's just looking at ln, and in the brackets here, x, whatever quantity you're working with, whatever row you're working with, A8, and divides it, is divided by ln of 2 here, the base 2 here, that natural log. So that's all you're doing if we went back up here. And then that's for our column B here, and of course we're looking at row 8 here for B here. Okay, so now let's look at 2 here for C here, column C here, cumulative total here. All you're doing here is you put in an equal sign, sum, and then sum, and then in brackets B $5 here to B whatever row you're looking at here. So B5 is always the reference here. It's always coming off that whatever you have for your first unit cost here in case 100, it's always taking that, and then it's summing to whatever row you're going down here to B8 here. So B5 to B8. And then just looking at it, just to understand the indexing here, it's just, for if you looked at B5, you're looking at B6, it is sum of B5 to B6, up to B7, B5 to B7, B5 to B8 here. So just understand that sequence here. Okay, so that's for column C here. Again, we're dealing with row 8 here, or that unit number here 4. And then finally here for column D here, the cumulative average time here per unit here. That's 3 here. Again, we're dealing with 8 here. All you're going to do is you're going to have in this column D here, you're going to have equals sign C8 A8. That's for that particular row here. So, and if you look at your indexing here, all that's going to be is you're going to go like for row 6 here, you're going to have C6 divided by A6 here. Just understand you're making that division. C7 divided by A7, and then C8 divided by A8. So all you're doing is taking whatever you have here in your particular row here under your C column, you're just dividing it by whatever number you have here under your A column, that reference row. Okay, so that's our basic learning curve calculator here. And again, this was for the incremental unit time here, just to understand that. Maybe I just better back off here and then we'll just focus in here so you can see those numbers here real close here. I'll focus in here and then you can see it. So just remember, I've got it all keyed here. We have to determine for column B here, that was this function here. For column C here, it was this function. And then for column D here, it was this function that we're talking about. Okay, so that's our basic calculator. Okay, so one other thing we want to look at here. Now, just say, for example, we did the Excel function here. Just to understand that column B here, that function, that f of x, or that unit time, that was the individual unit time here, unit cost. Now, if we just use MapleSoft or some math calculator, just to understand what that is here. So what we were doing here, that y here, we were calculating that y here. We did it for 20 different numbers. That was that costing function here. We started out with our unit cost here of 100, and then as we gained experience, it went down by that 20 to 80% ratio here. Okay, so how we would calculate that unit cost here, just using a regular calculator or putting it into, for example, some software package. I'm just showing it from X to 20 here. We would go here. So Y here, that unit cost, is just going to be taking that, looking at it here, that cost of the first unit here. And I base that on 100 here because it's a nice number to work with, the cost of the first unit here. And then you take that times whatever your learning rate is here. Whatever the learning rate is. In this case, it was 80% or 0.80 here. So you would take this cost of the first unit, this hundreds here, and that little period here, that means it's times 0.80 here, or your learning rate here. And then you raise that to the power of, I'm showing B here. And what B is here, it's going to be this number here, log to the base 2 of X here. And X is that index here, that index from 1 to 20, or that unit numbers that we're looking at here. So you would raise this 0.8, or your learning rate here, you raise it. It'll be a little caret in here. You raise it to the log base 2 here, 2.0, to whatever unit you're working with, from 1 to 20 here. Okay, so you understand what that is here. Just if you would just calculate your individual unit time, your unit cost, if you were just putting it into your calculator and putting it in those terms here. Okay, so that's what we do. And then one other thing here, just to make a point of it. This here, again, calculated your unit cost, or hours per piece, or whatever. That was our function here, that f of x, that column B that we're working off here. Now, if we looked at column C here, 2 here, when we worked with the cumulative average model, you could come up with some easy function here to calculate your cumulative total time or total cost here. But we're dealing with the incremental model here, and there's some ramifications to that, and it's more difficult to come up with the at cumulative total time here. It's easy to work with it off Excel, but if you're putting it in one of these functions, we're going to have to look at that more thoroughly here, because it's quite of a elaborate calculation here if you're going to just put it into your calculator here. So again, this y was unit cost. Y equals your unit cost here times some this k here represents some algebraic midpoint of the lot or the units that you're working at, and then it was raised to the power of b here. So the difference here is with this incremental model, this k, or what units that you're working with, is some algebraic midpoint of some lot number, and that is what we're talking about, this variable rate. It's not a constant rate. When we talked about the cumulative average model, we're using at a constant rate here, but with the incremental model, it's a variable rate here. So our cumulative total time, if we put it into our calculator or something, we'd have to come up with a whole different function here. Okay, so that'll pretty much summarize our topic here when we're looking at this learning curve or experience curve, and we looked at it in terms of the incremental unit time here. Okay, so that'll summarize our discussion.